Okay, that is awesome. So it's 7:32. I think,
Yeah.
we could just go ahead and people will join in progress and um I, Rabbi Strassfeld, I just wanted to once again, I think probably most, if not all, people here were here last week, but I do want to just, by way of very brief introduction, just reiterate our gratitude for having this opportunity to get an extended amount of time with you over these three sessions to engage with your most current thinking and get to dig into it a little bit and hear your further reflections. And you are a person who I think for many of us over the course of your Jewish leadership career has had a lot of impact on our lives, and it's a real treat for us to be able to get to study with you in this very direct way. So thank you again for making time for this, and I will turn things over to you if that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for. I'm just wondering what you get. You'll have what will be left to say next.
That won't be a
But no, but
problem.
that was seriously that was a really nice, uh, nice introduction. Nice. Uh, Thank you. I appreciated that.
Total pleasure.
I thought I would um, start. I mean, the rabbi told me some questions that people had after the last session, so I thought I would start with just trying to answer two of those, and then we'll go into talking about God and prayer um, and see where we go. So um, one question was in terms of my book, Judaism Disrupted, who did I imagine the audience of the book? Who was I trying to write to? And it's actually an interesting question because when I showed some people, parts of when I'd written some of the book, I asked a few people to give me some feedback, and um, one of the uh, one of the feedbacks was like, "Oh, you're trying to speak to two different audiences, and you can never books can't do that. You have to have only one audience." And the person who asked you this question talked about whether my audience was the people on the periphery of Jewish life to describe them that way, um, and or the people who are involved in Jewish life or involved in synagogues in whatever way, but who perhaps are looking for something additional in their Jewish lives to enrich them, or sometimes whatever you can imagine. Either they're sort of wondering, is this really? Am I mostly doing this just because I've always done it, or is there, do I really have a commitment to do it or to continue doing it? I actually, in some ways, I I was when I thought of the audiences, I thought what audience would be the people that are on the that I talked about this last time, with people who think there's not much in Judaism, and therefore it's peripheral to the way they live their lives. And I also thought that liberal rabbis would be um, another audience. in any case, the book was actually much longer in its original edition, um, and and probably for a variety of reasons, I cut down the book, and I think actually it's a better book. But I'm, despite everybody who said, including people who supposedly knows about such things, that you can only have one audience. I think I'm still trying to reach lots of different people, and part of the challenge of the book is um, it's I don't know what the right word is. Like sophisticated might not be the right word, but it's not as um, in some ways, even though I'm all about accessibility, it's not as accessible as the catalog. Um, uh, you know, you it's a harder book, or it's a more challenging book, or again, I'm struggling for the right word here, but it's not. There was that whole series for a while about such and such for dummies. So the Judaism for dummies. But in a nice. The point is to make it accept. I think it's there's a lot uh, of texts and teachings that are part of the book. Um, and so I think it's yeah, you have to in some ways want to engage in the book. It's not just like, um, but I am, trying to, as I reach both the insiders and the outsiders, and in some ways, of course, since I'm doing a lot of speaking in Jewish institutions, I'm mostly reaching, insiders, and I don't know if I said, I'm doing this class. I also just spoke up in the Berkshires last week, so I'm already confused what I said to which group. Did I tell this story here? So you can feel free to stop me if this is the second time I'm saying something. But um, I, it's actually been a really interesting experience to be out there speaking to Jews all over the country, and to go to different synagogues, sometimes for Shabbat or part of Shabbat, and see how different communities are doing are in different ways trying to respond to some of the challenges that I talk about in the book and that we're all conscious of. So I don't know if the person who asked the question is on at the moment, but
They are. I don't know if they want to have if they have a follow up. Okay, all right, all right. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I actually have a little quick follow up, Rabbi Strassfeld. Have you spoken outside of the organized Jew? Like, have you been, in even just a little bit? Have you gotten feedback from outside of like the institutional Jewish world?
um, it's hard to get access to it, right? In other words, um, you know, yeah, it's hard to get. There's not. I mean, unfortunately, um, there's the number of Jewish media outlets has drastically shrunk. I'm not sure that the unaffiliated were reading the Jewish newspapers in any case, but and one of the things I tried to do was I actually hired a publicist to work on getting word about the book into um, I was hoping it would get into some non-Jewish media, um, whether it's, a morning show on TV, local TV, or okay, so I'm not getting a story in the New York Times, but how about the Boston Globe? How about the Hartford Courant? How about, is it the Cleveland Ledger? Did I just make that up?
Plain dealer.
Plain Dealer, right?
Yeah.
Plain Dealer, or even smaller than So, um, and he, I mean, he got me on some podcasts, some radio, but he was pretty unsuccessful, and and partly it's there are very few morning shows on TV anymore. I mean, it's all like that world has been disrupted, um, and so that might have been some outlet, but um, I'm happy to, if anybody has suggestions or a contact or um, and I've done a number of podcasts. That's one thing that there's more of than there used to be, and I think that's a pretty good way of reaching people. And
Mhm.
of course, you just have no idea who's listening, but mostly they've been um, Jewish podcasts, and so again, I kind of assume it's more of the committed. But
Thank, thank you.
so yes, so let me do this the other question and then get to our topic.
Great, great.
So the question was that we studied this text of the Hasidic master Sfat Emet, who says the Torah is all about one thing: freedom. And someone asked, was like, what does that really mean? I mean, it's a nice bumper sticker or a slogan, but what does that mean? And um, I think this is what I understand, and I think it's a correct interpretation that he sees that there are a lot of things in life that get in the way of you reaching your full potential, or you really feeling you can be more like the person you want to be. And I may have said this last time, but and obviously there are real limitations. That you don't have. You don't have all the money you would like to whatever to go, or trips around the world. So like money could be, or there's just gee, I really like to be an artist, but actually I have no ability, for that. So there are things that just don't allow you to live all your dreams. But and I don't think he's suggesting that, oh, if you just do the Torah and you're really committed, that you'll turn into a person who can do anything, or a perfect person. But I think it's more um, inner qualities, um, that you if you struggle with anger, um, uh, it often gets in the way of relationships, uh, of being happy in the world, because often you're not really happy about being angry. It's just a mode that you fall into, whether you feel comfortable, however you got there, right? And I think that's true of a lot of things. Like, are you a person who's afraid of new things? Do you think you always think, I'm not really that good at doing that, whatever that is, right? And that keeps you back from well, maybe actually you could do that, and you could get a job or whatever that you find more fulfilling, or um, et cetera, et cetera. Um, So the example I often use, and we'll come back to this, I think, next week when we're talking about kind of awareness and ritual. But one thing and here, stop me if I said this last week. I think I said it in the Berkshires, but it struck me working on the book that about the 10th commandment. Did I talk about this? No. So the 10th commandment is do not covet, right? And it's really, forget about do not covet wife, your neighbor, but it's basically don't covet the things that other people own. That's really what it's about. And it struck me like it's kind of strange that that's one of the 10 commandments, right? You only get 10 commandments. Is that really among the top commandments? Excuse me. And really, does it really belong there? You could so many other things you could have put there, whatever. But it struck me that I think in some ways it's an example of the things I was just talking about, the things that kind of trap you or prevent you or get in the way of being who you could be. So coveting is there's a 19th century teacher, rabbinic teacher, Samson Raphael Hirsch, who talks about coveting is really wanting what you don't have, right? It's not something you need. It's what you don't have. That's what coveting somebody else's stuff, right? And he points out the truth is, if you ever get that, right? If you ever wanted that, really nice bicycle, and you get the bicycle, you're not going to be happy because you'll want something else, right? It's a kind of bottomless pit that really can never be fulfilled. No matter how much you get, you're never going to be satisfied. And and this is a something that's in the way that's in some ways completely up to you to change, right? So you either can live your life in the land of dissatisfaction and your whole life is you're just like unhappy, or you can come to a place of satisfaction, and that allows you to not live in that land of unhappiness, to live in a very different place. And I think that's what the Sfat Emet is talking about. That Torah, through its teachings and some of its practices that encourage perhaps satisfaction, can free you from those things that are kind of roadblocks on your road. So I hope that makes it a little clearer. And now, just to make things confusing, let's turn to God, which is so. Yeah. So if Rabbi, if you could keep track of the time, so like because we want to do both God and prayer.
Yeah.
So so I just can get caught up in the moment. So okay.
Want to split that like 50-50, Rabbi
Yeah.
Strass? Okay.
Yeah. Let's try that.
Okay. Great.
All right. So I hope some of you might have read the section in the book, but I'm sure even without that, God, you have some notion of your own notion about God, and that's part of what to talk about. And I'm coming from like some of you at least, coming from a Reconstructionist place, right? So in the book I actually talk about Harold Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, partly because like many people have heard of that book. Many fewer people have heard of Reconstructionism. And, and if you read the book, then, it's a very, I thought a very good explanation of Reconstructionism. Much more, Mordecai Kaplan had a lot of talents and genius, but, writing books that are accessible, not so much. So I thought he took Kaplan's notions and made them clear and apparent, and is and people, when it first came out, there were a lot of people misread the title. They thought the title was "Why Bad Things Happen to Good People," and importantly, he was saying when bad things, right? And in some ways, the theology of that book is that rejecting a supernatural God, that means a God who acts in the world, that punishes people and rewards people. And so the question of why bad things happen to good people becomes much less important in Kushner's or Kaplan's understanding of how God acts or doesn't act in the world. So just the Kaplan talked about God as the power that makes for salvation. I sometimes like to refer it, because that's kind of sort of old-fashioned language in a way. Salvation, often people think it's one of those Christian words, right? So you could say the force that points or encourages us towards redemption or revelation. And Rabbi Steve, let me ask: is this should I do this, or like everybody here kind of knows this, and I should?
In terms of like if there's a particular subsection of the chapter that that you think would be a good jumping off point for people to respond to, or I don't know. I mean, I guess we could see if people had anything. I don't know. It's up to you. You are running this, but
okay. Let me go on. A little bit more.
Yeah.
I just in the book, I asked myself the question, well, what do I believe? And maybe I'll just share that few lines. I've come to a place where I don't have to answer all the contradictions about God. On the one hand, it still doesn't make sense to me that there is some being that runs the universe. But I also don't believe we live in a random universe. I believe life has a purpose. Whenever I think about it rationally, I can't really believe in a God. Whenever I sit with my heart, I have faith that we live in a universe of meaning. So in some ways, that's my own kind of, contradictory elements. One thing I do emphasize, broadly in the book, but is that two things I would say. One is, and it's one of the core principles, that we're all created in the image of God. And it's a challenging notion what that means, because what does it mean to be created in the image of God who has no image? So I think I want to say, picking up on an important rabbinic teaching, is that we're called upon to be God-like, that not like all-powerful and all-knowing, but rather to be merciful as God is merciful, to help those in need as God helps those in need, etc. In that sense, I think we are to be partners in the ongoing work of creation. And we're, to go back to, in one way, to Kaplan's definition, salvation or redemption, that we are the agents for that redemption. In other words, the redemption of the world will only take place by the acts of human beings. And I had one small teaching that I'll share and related to that, which is I have a subtitle. The book, the editor of the book said, "Oh, it's good to put subtitles in to break up the page and stuff like that." So it actually was a good idea. So I have one in this chapter: Jews don't bow to idols, nor do Jews bow to God. And again, this is something that struck me, is like, when we do the Amidah, the central prayer of every Jewish service, right at the beginning, right, the tradition is on the first three words, right? So when you say Baruch, you're supposed to bend your knees. When you say Atah, you're supposed to bow down, right? And then when you say God's name, Adonai, you're supposed to be upright. And, often that is broadly interpreted as, what we're doing is acting like we're before an earthly king, right? So if you go to the court of an earthly king, you bow down, right? And in fact, the whole structure of the Amidah, particularly the weekday Amidah, is, you could see it's like going to the king's court, right? So you come in to the court and you praise the king. You say, "Oh, great king, wonderful king," right? So that's what we do in the first part of the Amidah. Then in the middle part, now you say, "Okay, here's my petition. I would like you to, rule in favor of me in this land dispute," whatever it is. And then at the end, the last part is thank you, right? You say, "Thank you, king," and you sort of, bow your way out. And that's how I always thought that's what this is about. And some people find that problematic, and the whole melech, the whole metaphor of king, etc., as problematic. But leaving that aside, I want to point out that, in fact, we do kind of bow, bend our knees, bow. But when we say God's name, we stand upright. You would think we would bow lower, right? And I think that what it's doing, it's this choreography that has some meaning, not just, "Oh, we do it because we always do it." That you begin by acknowledging that there's something larger than yourself. That's called traditionally God, but in some ways it could just be the universe. Like, the whole universe isn't Michael, right? There is something much larger than myself. And it's a way of understanding your place in the world. And it's a kind of spiritual way of being. Like, I'm not the whole thing, right? So you do that. But then when you come to God's name, you stand upright because, you are created in the image of God, right? And that's why every human being deserves respect. But it's also because, as I said right before, because we are the co-creators. We're the ones who are supposed to continue creation. So, God isn't looking for sniveling servants. God's looking for partners. And I think broadly, if I had to summarize my theology in a nutshell, that's what I would say. So
I'm tracking Rabbi Strassfeld, also the chat, if that's okay. And Barb put a question. Barb, I noticed you didn't give noun as an option in that grammatical theology, and Barb, do you want to say anything more? I don't have to. Is God more like an adjective or more like a verb? I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about that.
I think that God is definitely not a noun. And if anything, it's an energy, it's a force that is between people and between people and nature. And you alluded to that Michael, in your book, that it's certainly not that you don't believe in a God who can intervene and can heal someone who's sick. So, but as individuals, we can act on that force between us, that energy between us, and alleviate maybe not the illness itself, but the isolation or that the illness might have brought.
Right, and that's whole, Reconstructionists talk about predicate theology. That is, uh, being compassionate is godly, right? Rather than it's God or God is compassionate, right? Um, um, right, and I think that's exactly correct, right? Um, there's a statement in the Talmud that visiting the sick is very important. Just to pick up what you, and it relieves 1/60th of the person who's suffering illness. So you know so once say, wait, if you got 60 people to visit somebody, right? So it's like completely missing the point. But it is saying that what we do makes a difference, right? That and right, and it doesn't. And this world is, the way the world works is, it's a world where with illness and disease, right? And there's no magic formula, and it doesn't matter how righteous a person you are. In the end, you will die, right? And it's not because God's punishing you, but it's because it's the way the world works.
I have a follow-up, but I don't. I want to. Are there other people? I want to. I have a grammar theology follow-up, but I want to make sure that other people who may have questions have a chance to, or responses or reflections. So please raise your hand or otherwise indicate that if you want to jump in. Kevin, are you ready? No. Okay. Sorry.
Let me while people think for a minute, let me just say one of the other things. I love the image of that we're God wrestlers, which I think Arthur Waskow, I believe, created many decades ago, and in some ways using the image of Jacob, wrestling with the being through the night, and I find that that's a useful expression of. It's another way of talking about our relationship to God, right? Not just as co-partners, but that we're God wrestlers. We struggle we just struggle with it, right? And it's and we don't just, and part of that saying is, oh, there isn't like, oh, here's the dogma, like, and either accept it, you don't accept it. It's there isn't. I mean, I don't know that we have so much dogma, but it's something that we're wrestling with. Oh, and the last thing just struck me. It's very important to me that from the story of the burning bush, when Moses says, you all know this probably, when Moses says to God, well, I want to tell the Egyptians and the Israelites the name of the God that sent me. God responds, yeah, sure, yeah, which is like hard to translate, but a lot of translations are, I will be what I will be, which to me suggests that God is changing. Now, whether, philosophers might say, wait, that's problematic. I'm not much of a philosopher, but, or it's just our understanding of God continues to change and evolve. Right. and it isn't, and ultimately, I have a chapter, a part of this chapter is about idolatry. I won't go in, but it's when the Israelites say it's about the golden calf, this is your God. The problem is it's now fixed God in one image. And not only does God not have an image, but it's saying this and only this is God. And I posit that's actually a form of idolatry. That God can't be encapsulated in one image, which is the correct, and all the other images are incorrect. So that's also a piece of it.
Thank you, Michael. All right, Alan, I see your hand, and Dorinda, I saw you put a question in the chat too. So, well, Alan, you want to?
Okay, hi. So over the last year or so, I guess I'll say my understanding of God has changed, and it's so I'll really be open here. It was changed partly by some experiences under the influence of a mild dose of marijuana, but nonetheless, that's where it came from. And it was of God as an experience of holiness, literally myself feeling like a holy person, and the environment around me, whether it was in my house or outside, felt like a holy place. And so the idea for me of praying, talking to God, is still a possibility, but it's more of seeking that experience in which everything seems as it should be. No, just like the not coveting, it's like I don't need anything else in this moment. This moment is perfect. And this is an eternal moment because that's the only time we have. And so I don't have a language at all. There doesn't seem to be an adjective, a verb, or noun. It's more an experience. And so that my dilemma is more like, okay, so how do I pray to that? But it's more trying to seek out that experience.
Thank you, Alan, for sharing that.
Yeah, that was, thank you. That was really beautiful. And it's, look, I think, there's obviously within Judaism a strand of mysticism. And, I'm pretty sure I said this last time, but, Hasidism is a very important source of teaching and spirituality for me. And they talk a lot about the veikut, of feeling connected to God, or feeling connected to the oneness. That could be one way of understanding God, or one way of talking about God. And I think that's part of the strand. And we'll get to prayer in a few minutes. I think there's a lot of things that are challenging about prayer and the way we traditionally thought about it. But in some ways, that mystical notion was there, certainly, particularly for the Hasidim, starting in the 18th century. When the Hasidic masters, some of them talked about like, well, they didn't want to say, well, you can't ask God for things because that was just completely traditional, But they said like, that's not really what prayer should be about. It's not to ask for things. It's to feel connected to God, to feel connected to the oneness. And so some of the Hasidic teachings, they have things like what you should really be doing is entering into the word, and then actually entering into the letter that the word's made from, which I'm not exactly clear what that means, but you can kind of imagine. But it sort of suggests that it's not the words, right? The words they're not words anymore, right? And it was, it's partly mysticism that the world was, God took the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and created the world. So there's some mystical note, but it's all this sense of that underlying everything is a deeper reality. And in that sense, saying the words or doing this or that is not the key thing. It's supposed to lead to that deeper experience. And I think one of the other things Hasidism would say is they used a model of Ezekiel's chariots, where there's these strange creatures that are going back and forth. So they read the spiritual life as a going back and forth, rather than using a ladder metaphor. Sometimes they did because of Jacob's ladder, but and I very much like that back and forth rather than up and down, because it feels, in a way, what they're saying is that it's the nature of life is that you can't be, completely spiritual or have sense of oneness all the time. You can have it, and then you step away from it, or you lose it, or whatever. But it's not like, oh, you're a bad person. If you were a really good person, you could be on that level all the time. I understand it as it's just that's how life is, and you just want to continue to try and move towards the oneness, and try and have that experience. And I would say that then they're hoping that will change how you act in the world as well, right? That would have some ramifications. I don't think it was. I'm just thinking out loud here. I don't know if I've said this before, but I think the idea isn't you're supposed to reach nirvana. You're supposed to get salvation. I think you're supposed to, move back and forth, strive for that, have those experiences, and then those experiences would affect how you behave in the world to other people. But it isn't to, well, I'm saved and the rest of the world can go to hell, because like, I know when I get to heaven, I'll be, sitting at the table with God studying Torah, or whatever it is. So all I'm saying is I think there's a real context, and even some thinking about, well, what would prayer mean if it's not about asking for things, or even about praising God. Yeah, let me stop.
No, thank you very much, Rabbi Strassfeld. Dorinda, I see that you want to pursue the freedom conversation. I think it sounded to me, tell me if this is correct, Rabbi Strassfeld, that you were thinking that maybe we'd circle back to that next week when we talk a little bit more about specifically the process of becoming more free and how Jewish life can make that happen, that may be something that we'll circle back to at next week's session. Is that
Yeah.
right for you?
I mean, it's a little bit more like the practical. I mean, not exactly practical, but it's about practices and ritual, and right. And in a way, it's taking what I just said, but saying, okay, maybe you have this experience. Some people have this experience, but now how do I live? How do I live that? How do I not find satisfaction? How do I become less angry and more patient? And it's not, yeah. I mean, so and my broad suggestion is that ritual is meant to be about that, and broadly, it is related to what was just said. It's about a certain kind of awareness and cultivating a certain kind of awareness. And that goes both to personal qualities and to the true nature of the world and to what's important, and what's not so important. All those things are a piece of that. So we'll have more time, I think, next week.
What I'd like to say is when I've read the chapter, this is chapter 7, I could connect to everything you were saying, because all the complaints and the discomforts and the disappointments with religion that you spelled out very precisely were things that we've actually talked about and that we've addressed at HaLev in terms of creating a different prayer, a different style of prayer. And what I'm missing from when you're talking is I'm not getting all the facts and the detail. And I don't know how you can do both. I mean, it was in the book, you were very specific about what you were saying. And I feel like a lot of the things you're talking about now are just so general, I can't make use of them.
And you're talking particularly about prayer, or
well,
more broadly?
Everything. I like how you started. I love how you were just not comfortable with the whole Jewish experience. And you went to a lot of different synagogues, and there was something that was lacking. And from there, you went about trying to discover what it was and creating it. And that's what I want to hear about, is what it is that you discovered and created in your own temple.
Okay. So maybe that's a good segue to move towards prayer.
Okay. All right. Let's take it. Thank you, Dorinda, for providing that for us. Okay. Great.
So, and again, Dorinda, I'm sure some of the things I'll say is, yeah, we know that, we struggle with that, etc. But I'll try and do that part briefly. And I would say, there's a lot of challenges in traditional prayer. I mentioned the metaphors of God as king, masculine. Hebrew is, not the language that most people are fluent in. But I think, and then if you don't believe in a God that acts in the world, then why am I praying for, whether it's a red bike or, I want, my mother to get better and not die, right? And so for me, I think the biggest challenge related to all those challenges is that I find prayer disconnected from the words in the prayer book. The words, the prayers in the prayer book feel disconnected from anything that I really care about, or I'm struggling with, or I'm thinking about. And I'll just give you one example. So the Friday night after 9/11, leading Friday night services in my synagogue in Manhattan, and there was still, smoke in the air from 9/11, and everybody is in shock, and we come to Lecha Dodi, the hymn, the Friday night hymn, which we sing every week, and I say, look at the imagery and the stanzas here that talks about a broken city where everything is turned like kind of upside down. And all of a sudden, this wasn't just this song that we sang that mostly people didn't pay attention to the words, but it was like what we're all experiencing, like this catastrophe, unbelievable catastrophe, and with some images of hope, right? So at that moment, the liturgy was completely relevant. Where I think most times people say, okay, that's most of it's not bad particularly, but like, what does it have to say to me? And plenty of other examples, but just one other was like for about 9 years, I co-led a healing service with Debbie Friedman, the songwriter, blessed memory, and we had to create the service. There was no such thing as a traditional healing service, and so it wasn't a question of, well, do we do this part of the liturgy? We just skipped it. There wasn't a liturgy. I mean, there was Debbie's Mishaberach, right? And in the end, we created a service with a handout. That was a mixture of her music, Hasidic melodies that I like, maybe put to a line from Psalms, a bunch of readings, and we decided that the service wasn't going to be about illness. The only thing that referred to that was the Mishaberach at the end, but it would be about themes that felt relevant, like brokenness and wholeness, hope, light and darkness. And often they would fit with the holiday. So Hanukkah, light and darkness, right? Tu B'Shvat about growth and rebirth, and whatever it was. And the thing was that everybody coming to that service knew why they were coming. They were either ill or they had a loved one who was ill. And so they knew why they were there, and everything in the service felt relevant. Like no one said, why are we saying that? Because it was about brokenness and wholeness. I mean, you might have not liked the reading or whatever, this or that, but it wasn't like, I don't know, we need an explanation why we're saying this or what this really means. It was just, and it spoke to deeply what was in their hearts, which is why they came. Now I don't, that won't work as a general service in a synagogue, because services have to be for everybody who's coming, not just. But it was just an example of that you could have a group's spiritual experience that kind of brought people together, and that people felt was meaningful, and they would, come back to next month because they wanted to, because, so that's what I've been. Those things became somewhat models to me, and I was at this point I was the rabbi at SAJ, and as a Reconstructionist congregation, it was kind of on the right wing end, or the more better to say more traditional end rather than right wing of the perspective, and won't go through the long saga of various struggles and battles and arguments and stuff, but one of the things that we found after a number of years did was we had a handout at the for the service, that each Shabbat service that I would prepare. It was like 5 Xerox pages, whatever it was. Some readings and maybe a line of liturgy that we didn't normally sing, but that we were going to sing this week because the liturgy was on the theme of that the handout had, and so that was it. It was like it was thematically arranged, and had those elements leading, and we did it at the beginning of the Shabbat morning service. So instead of the traditional Birchot HaShachar, those blessings, and basically Sukkah de Zimra, the Psalms, we did that. And then starting with Baruch Hu, and the Shema and the Amida, it was fairly traditional, though we tried to shorten the service. By leaving out parts of the traditional liturgy that we didn't think were important.
You were very responsive to your congregation, and you really were listening to what the people were saying about their complaints about praying or being at services.
Well, no, that's actually, that would be thank you. But what happened was, needless to say, the more traditional people were the people that came on Shabbat. So at some point they said, some said, and wait, why are you changing the service that we like for the mythical people that you think will come if we have a different services, and we don't think they're going to come? And the truth is, I couldn't honestly say, oh, they'll come, build it and they will come. You're better off with a ball field in Iowa. But so in a way, I would have done more than that, but I knew that
right.
I didn't have,
it's a process.
right. I didn't have the whatever. I didn't think I would win, and I wanted to both be respectful to the people and I couldn't, as I said, I couldn't say no, but we'll be turning people away. There'll be a line outside the door if we just do this, right? So, and we did, we also introduced musical instruments, which again, there were some people who were really opposed to that. We did it like one Shabbat a month. It wasn't every, and that people came to accept, even some of the people who were really unhappy about it. So all that's to say is, it's very hard to change things, and And so let me say one more piece. And oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We've seen that it is possible. Rabbi Steve has done a lot of things you have suggested.
Right.
Very
So
Inspired by Rabbi Strassfeld, right?
I can't tell you how touched I am that someone listened to me and no, I mean seriously, I'm really very touched, and yeah. So yeah, it'd be interesting. Maybe the conversation, unless did someone have a hand? Maybe we should have a conversation about that, your experience of that, both positively or the challenges. And Rabbi Steve asked me to watch a tape of one of the services, which I did. And I have a few comments, but I think we might, I mean, you tell me whether you think that we should do that. I'll tell you. I'll tell you the two. I thought the two best things about that service. And I only saw that one, and I watched it 3 different times, so it loses something of the of the actual flow. And I also want to say, because all I could see was the rabbi and like 5 people who I assume were on Zoom, right? So it's disconcerting. Then you hear voices coming from the ether of the people who were sitting there who were taught, and I don't know the congregation. So if I knew, then I would say, oh, that's Joe. I recognize Joe's voice. Or you usually say their name anyways. But so it was, that was not only disconcerting, that's takes something away. It takes something away from the experience of being in the community, et cetera, to, and it's probably a little bit different if you're sitting in the congregation and however many people are there, but there's a group of people, and then there's, some people on Zoom. It's hard to really feel their presence, but you really try to make everybody feel present. But it's just the technology is hard, and I mean you could get a camera to show the people who in the but then it's another level of logistics and whatever. So I thought the readings were really great. As someone who's used readings a lot, I thought it was, they were really good readings. And I thought the other strength of it was the comments by people, right? That really participated in that way and had thoughtful things to say. And it felt a community experience. I thought those were, yeah, and overall I thought it worked. The one thing I wondered whether, and it may have been because the way I heard, in pieces, and I didn't have the right.
I sent the wrong material.
First, so there was like, wait, where's that reading?
Yeah.
The experience of people in congregation. Where's the page? I can't. I would have liked. Let me just put it like that. I would have liked more, and maybe you do something broadly similar each time. So, and therefore, the people in the congregation know. But I would like, wait, what's the larger thinking about these 3 topics, and why'd you do them 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3 instead of creation, revelation, why'd you do it that way? And you may have said something about why you were doing the Shema at the beginning and the end.
Hmm.
But I thought, a little bit more of that would have made it. And also I thought sometimes, um, sometimes I use readings a bunch, and I I wonder whether, well, did people get that it was those three words in the reading that were like the key
Yeah.
point here? And so sometimes I say, on our theme, whatever, on our theme of creation, the phrase of blah blah blah,
Right.
in the next, pay attention to the other thing I thought was actually really interesting was the Quaker. What was the phrase? As you
Hmm.
arrive, as you.
Oh, yeah, right. In the Torah, was that the Torah study? Um, as path unfolds, is that?
Something like
Yeah,
that. So
yeah.
I thought that was actually like an important takeaway for me, because I thought what that was and what the people's response to it was, oh, this is a teaching of a spiritual practice, maybe is the right, like that. This is something that you can experience, not everybody, but it's not unlikely you'll experience. And how do you respond to that moment, that kind of experience? And it made me think, um, what if I tried to have something like that in each service, right? A different, um, there's a verse, um, Moses says, when Pharaoh says, okay, you can go worship in the desert, but you know, you know, uh, leave. I forget which. He's always this negotiating. Oh, leave the kids. No, no, we need the kids. So it's of the animals. So whatever. The Moses' response is, "Anachnu lo neda manasek." I don't remember. We won't know how to worship God, what's required, until we get to the place, to the experience, right? So Moses is saying it's an excuse. We have to take all the animals because we don't know if we need sheep or goats or whatever. But I mean, it's all like ridiculous, negotiating on these two guys' parts. But I thought it was actually an expression not so different than the Quaker thing. It's like, just be there and see what's necessary, or what's the challenge, or or be willing. Here's a broader way. It's a story of the 40 years in the deserts. Be willing to go into the unknown, right?
Hmm.
And meet it without knowing, right? And that's a challenge. That's a spiritual challenge, right? Because it's anxiety producing, right? So, right? So beyond, so I often think about services around themes like gratefulness, or which are spiritual themes. But I think there's also, when I'm thinking, this is just from watching this, I'm thinking about spiritual challenges. I mean, framing it, and maybe that's not the right word, but how do you, I'm blocking on his name. He was a Buddhist teacher, died. He talks about rest and unknowing. And he does.
What's that Thich Nhat Hanh?
No, it's not Thich Nhat. No, he was an American.
Oh.
He'll come to me. I know his name, but
Hmm.
um, Yeah, it was just this, like you read a phrase and it really sticks with you as related to a truth, right? There's this, he says, we think that if we just find the right book or the right teacher or the right blah, 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 then we'll get it. Everything will be fine. And he said, Bernie Glass.
Bernie Glassman? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Someone
yeah.
suggested Ram Dass. Okay. I guess he's okay.
Right, but he says there is no such thing, and it's a practice to rest in unknowing. Like, okay, I don't know, and that's okay. I just felt like those, because we both did these services occasionally, right? If you had to do the service every week, it's like a big challenge. Not only finding all the reading, but it's also just, though I don't think, theoretically there could be whatever, a dozen such themes that are not specific to holidays, and that you repeat them a couple times in the year, like, because equanimity, you don't have to only do it once a year, and okay, so you do nature for Tu B'Shvat, but you could anyway. So that's a bunch of reactions, and
Rabbi, there's a question in
yeah,
the
go ahead.
Yeah,
brought
yeah.
up.
I
Harris
thank you.
says,
And you know what, Alan, actually, I saw Judy's question. I want to put that up, but I know Barb had her hand up for a second. I just wanted to check, and then we'll move to Judy for sure. And before Barb, you say anything, I want to thank you, Rabbi Strassfeld, for taking the time to sit through a recording of an entire Shabbat morning service, which I know is not a small thing to do. So really appreciate that, and appreciate your.
It was very useful. I feel like if nothing else, I got this Quaker thing to think about. So
thank you. All right, Barb, do you wanna say what you wanted to say, or
Well, I'd like to respond to the Quaker thing. My brother, who is an avowed atheist, lifelong, and who raised his children in a Unitarian church, has recently, within the past couple of years, started going to a friend's meeting, and he finds it very meaningful. So the real question I have is, what is the purpose of a communal service? And it can serve many purposes. You've talked about a healing prayer or healing service. We used to have, when I belonged to a Reconstructionist synagogue in Milwaukee, we would have an opening day service if it happened to coincide. And a Don Olam can be sung to many different tunes. And so we played around with Helm. So some of it was to amuse ourselves. Some of it was because we had a lot of young kids and we needed to amuse them. And our recent alternative services have been formed in order to assist individuals who don't connect with the traditional service. So there are multiple ways that a service can be directed.
Yeah. No.
And one way, sometimes you just need the familiar, saying the same Hebrew words, even if you don't understand all of them, that have been said for centuries.
Right.
I was maybe going to layer on to Barb's question, a question from Judy Harris in the chat about how do you weigh the relative importance of communal experience versus personal experience in a prayer context. And then I'll layer onto that. This was a question that I had as I was reading through the chapter. I think some members of HaLev at this class are familiar with Rabbi Mike Cummins' book, Making Prayer Real. And one of his main contentions, at least what I walked away with, is that maybe there needs to be a recalibration of the balance between community and individual prayer experience, and that maybe part of the lack of satisfaction in a communal prayer space for Jewish people over the last several generations has resulted from an abandonment of an individual prayer practice that was a foundation that they were then able to bring into a communal space. So that maybe that's too much for one question, but I think this balance of community, individual, and then, Barb's idea of all the different things one can do in a communal space. So however you want to respond to this. Yeah.
No, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, the truth is, people want different things, right? So, some people want it, familiar, traditional. Some people, really into, Torah study and discussion and not so much prayer. Some people, want to, sit and meditate, and other people, that's, had people at SAJ, like they would have jumped off the roof, so, so that's one of the problems. And most places can't do, like, we have 5 different options, just pick which one you want. And we have the staff that can do that in the rooms, and obviously smaller places, that don't have any of those things, right? So, I some of it, look, I mean, there's no easy answer. My bottom line is I just, feel that it's not working for too many people. And there were some people, in whatever, my generation, the previous generation, who came to synagogue, because kind of that's what you did, or nostalgia, or, whatever, a whole variety of reasons. And I just don't know that that's going to be enough now. I just think that connection to the tradition broadly is just not what it once was. And so I think the challenge is, how do you do all those things? I mean, I think some of it is, in a way, what you're doing is to say, oh, we have this service, the 5th Shabbat of the month, or even if it's one Shabbat a month, so, the people that, so, either people will come anyways, even though it's not exactly the cup of tea, or so I guess they won't, it's very hard to change things, but obviously part of it is to do it slowly. And, I kept on arguing, like, I just want to try this. I mean it when I say I want to try it, because it could turn out, this idea of whatever, I never did this, but let's do the whole service in English. Let's try that. That turns out, even I thought it was a terrible idea, right? So, so some of it is just trying to get people to, or, I introduced meditation slowly, where I said, we're going to meditate before services start. And nobody objected, because it wasn't like people were coming early anyways. Now they would get stuck in a meditation. Like, so I just, it's something, look, my first year at SAJ, I did a session after services about services, people say, "Oh, could you talk about Reconstructionism?" And because there'd been a period where the rabbis of SAJ weren't really Reconstructionists, so it was kind of whatever. And I did this whole thing about the services and Kaplan, blah blah blah. And then someone said to me, "Yeah, but we have the Reconstructionist prayer book, and basically." Seems to me the theology is the same as the old traditional prayer book, and the language is, except for a few places where it's changed, it's basically the same. Like, so what's Reconstructionist about? And I thought it was a good question, and I probably said that because I didn't have a better answer. So it just feels we're connected to this tradition which isn't working very well. I do think so. The individual, I absolutely think it's important to have a communal spiritual time. That so that if everybody was at home meditating or davening or by themselves, that might be fine. But there is something important. I mean, some of it is that community is important. I may have said, like, I originally had 10 core principles, and I added the 11th. I have 11 in my book because I realized I didn't have something about community. And I think community is essential. And in some ways, Shabbat and synagogue is now the place where Jewish community happens the most frequently. People don't live in. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Boston. The only people that lived in that neighborhood were Jews. You had to really go out of your way to meet someone who was not Jewish in that neighborhood. So there was a kind of Jewish experience, even though, it wasn't religious. I mean, there were 10 synagogues that mostly people didn't go to, and there was no kosher restaurant. There was a Jewish style place, it was so, but it was Jewish. Everything was Jewish about it. That doesn't exist, and I think one of the things that synagogues can do well is community. Now, people have to come, and they have to come regularly. But I think that's really important. And look, I think any of you who are meditators or have had experience meditating, right? You sit, if you go to a group and you're sitting, so whatever, the teacher says something and then everybody sits in quiet. And it shouldn't make any difference whether there's nobody there or just, just you. I mean, because nobody's talking. But it is different. It is different when you meditate in a group than when you're sitting by yourself. So there's something about that. And I think Judaism is meant to be lived in community, right? And in every way. And so I think, trying to find a way to create, and I think it should feel like, a religious experience or a spiritual experience, whatever language you want to. I mean, that's how I think about Judaism, not as a secular person, right? And and it could, and it could involve any of these things, and maybe it's about rotating different pieces, and or maybe there's times, well, it's fine. The people that want to have a Torah discussion go into the one other room we have, and the people that want to sing nigunim as a reflective practice or meditate or do yoga, whatever it is, we'll stay in this room, and then we come together for the end of the service and having kiddush, etc. I think that's the challenge. I'm concerned that about the future if I just don't know if synagogues continuing to do what they've done is going to work well enough. That there'll be enough people who say, yeah, that's what I want to do Saturday morning, or that's what I do Friday night. And it's probably like the book in general. I think if people experience meaning, whether it's being in a service or studying Torah or pausing at the mezuzah before they leave for the day as a practice, then they'll want to do it. And if they don't, then it'll be just like mixing wool and linen, chutneys. Yeah, I don't do that. Does anybody here do that? It's right. So we already have a bunch of those practices, and we don't need more of them. So
Rabbi,
have
I just wanted to
Yeah.
break in. I just wanted to have a question or a different element when you talk about community. Years ago, I went to a couple of services of Rabbi Michael Lerner out in the Bay Area,
yeah,
and he had the entire congregation from the beginning stand up, hold hands, start singing, and start dancing around the room. And we did that, and then we as a whole line marched out into the courtyard and circled around and did a collective meditation that he led. And the energy level was incredible. And the thing that stayed with me ever since is that Jews just stand still when they pray or when we meditate, and we don't move, and the ability to move and move and connect, move as a whole, as a body, connected. My feeling was I was connected to the people in that line of holding hands, and also it created a collective energy by doing that.
yeah. It sounds good. There are people that like I'm not dancing. Look, some of it. I think you're right. There's some of it is about energy. And part of the trajectory, and going back, to the late 50s and 60s when the catalog came out, like the typical synagogue was, basically it was quiet most of the time, not because people were meditating, but because the only people singing or doing anything were the rabbi and cantor up front, except for responsive readings, which never heard a congregation doing them enthusiastically. And then that changed to where now most synagogues, the music is congregational rather than performative, and there's an encouragement to people to participate, and there's an encouragement in people to participate in lots of aspects of the service. Torah readers or maybe some places lay people will sometimes give the Dvar Torah, etc. So it's all, and I think part of the value of musical instruments is it helps add sound and make the sound feel full, rather than 3 people are singing in a room that holds 500. So I think that's part of and there are other uses to the music as well. So, it has to work, right? So at B'nai Jeshurun congregation, and the famous congregation Upper West Side of Manhattan, they during Lecha Dodi, people would get up and dance around the room. Now, some people thought, well, this was happening because there were a lot of younger people looking for other younger people, and it was a good way to see people and be seen. So there was some of that social thing, which that's fine, but it was, and they don't do it anymore. I can't tell you when they stopped doing it, but it doesn't happen now. They don't have that young people in their 20s and 30s, particularly, and some of them have gotten older, and so one of the challenges is that it has to feel authentic. It has to work. It has to, and I'm sure in part, Michael Lerner, we're talking about, I mean, he really encouraged this, and that helped make it work, right? I think you have to, I mean, the bottom line is you have to think of who you are, what your strength is, what's the thing that may be a reach, but it's worth trying, and what's like, like don't model yourself on, B'nai Jeshurun that, gets whatever, 600 people, like it's irrelevant to your experience, really. But what of those things might work, and I saw an interesting thing. My wife was a rabbi. She's doing some work at Central Synagogue. She's consulting with them. So we've gone there for services. So Central Synagogue now has bypassed B'nai Jeshurun as the synagogue of the month. And it's, whatever, 800 people come Friday night, whatever, huge crowd come. And they have a large staff. It's very, very performative. But the thing I think they do interesting is making people feel welcome. I used to try doing this at SAJ for a while. Say, well, anybody who's here for the first time, stand up and introduce yourself. And I don't know if you do that or not, but but people felt awkward, and then we felt bad because nobody stood up, whatever. So, and I've seen other places, what they do is they say, turn to the person next to you and say Shabbat Shalom. So, and they spend like 2 minutes doing that. And people talk. At Central, I would say they spend 5 to 10 minutes doing it. And I think people feel really welcome. Because you go to more than just the person next to you. You just go around, and the rabbis walk into the, when people are talking, and then you could say, well, where you're from, what rather than Shabbat Shalom, have a nice, and you would think in a crowd that size, if you were coming, you would feel like, I don't know anybody, and it's awful. Like, this is why I don't want to go to synagogue, because I feel like an outsider, right? But there's a way they do it, and the way the rabbis talk about it, and more broadly, there's a kind of they're very good at celebrating simchas with people, important simchas, and where it feels, the rabbi seems to know this person, right? Like, rather than just saying, wish you and all the best on your wedding, and or the Mishra, just the Mishra. So, I would say with them, it's probably conscious. They decided they really wanted to do this and figure out how to do this, because they knew they were getting lots of people, and like, how do you, so one of their strengths is community. But someplace else, and it's a struggle every place. I used to like really try and get members of SAJ to walk up to the new people at Kiddush and not just talk to your friends. I know everybody just wants to talk to their friends, because part of the community aspect of synagogues is Kiddush, right? Like, if you want a community, don't cut out Kiddush, and if you want more of a community, make a more elaborate Kiddush, right? Because people hang around and get to know each other, right? So that's what I would say. My best, like, we'll figure out what makes sense. What are the strengths of your congregation that you could put into play here? Maybe it's having, greeters, or having someone who says, "Oh, you're new here. I'll sit next to you during services," and just help you find your way, if or it's something else, right? It could be anything. There's a number of poets in the congregation, and we're going to ask them to contribute poetry, not every week or something, but and it's different if you're reading Mary Oliver, or if Mary Oliver is a member of the congregation and is reading a poem, right? I'll stop with this, but I was in Amherst, Ben Wiener, Reconstructionist congregation. And they have, I may have said this to you, Steve. They have, like, once a month they have a music service, and the rabbi has a nice voice as a cantor with nicer voice, and they had like three other people who were singers, and maybe like 5 musicians. They were all members of the congregation, which actually I was wondering why it felt different than another service I was at, where the musicians were hired. Right? It was not only, there was a lot of them, but it was us doing this, right? And I think more people were singing, and the whole thing felt, it was well done, and the clergy are talented, but you can't, either yes or no, but or not that way or this way, but but it was a really, I thought it was really, it was just what you were talking about. It felt very spirited. The room felt very alive. You were like, glad to be there in this service, and so it's, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking on my feet while sitting down, but I think that's like that's a key thing. It's like, figure out what makes the most sense for you, given who you are, and what resources you might have in the congregation, and figure out how that might work, right? SAJ, we did one thing. We had this once a year program where SAJers who were writers would read from their works, and it could be people who were not professional writers. It could be people who just wrote or wrote poetry, and it was great. I mean, it was great because it was members of the congregation, and some of them were like, "Wow, that's really amazing piece that you wrote," But it was also just like, "Wow, look at us. We have these people who are talented." None of them were none of them were famous. None of them were anybody would have heard of. But and that was once a year. But it was like, I felt that was like one of the best things we did as a community, was that evening.
Thank you, and thank you for giving us a little bit more time than we had planned on this evening. And and thanks to everybody who stuck around. I want to note that there are a couple questions in the chat that we didn't get to tonight, and I would like to roll those over to next week, which, by the way, is on Wednesday
Wednesday.
next week. Just so people, I want to make sure everyone remembers that we're Wednesday 7:30 also, and if anyone else who didn't write a question in the chat, who has a question that they didn't get to ask tonight, want to send it to either me or to Alan Fetterman, we can compile a little list for Rabbi Strassfeld for next Wednesday to, again, kind of maybe begin next week's session by responding to questions that that people didn't have a chance to ask tonight. And yeah.
I have, like, you tell me if it's okay. I have a paragraph that.
I'm sorry. Oh, it's fine.
And
Right.
there was a text that we didn't get to, but
Yeah, right.
yeah, if we have a chance, I'll talk about the text next time. But I just want to read this because it's about prayer. So, your friend asks you, why do you belong to a synagogue? And even more puzzling, why would you attend on a regular basis? You answer, because it is one of the most important things in my life. I join with a community of others to explore critical issues of my life. Who am I? Who do I want to be? Where do I find or create meaning in my life? What is it all about? In the synagogue, one of the few places of refuge from cell phones, I have the ability to disconnect from the distractions of the world in order to renew the connections to the deepest place within myself that some call the soul. While I acknowledge that my time here on earth is the equivalent of a blink of the eye in the clock of the universe, I connect to a tradition that precedes me and will continue long after I'm gone, and thereby I touch eternity. I engage with the text of that tradition and am inspired by its ancient insights and the contemporary insights of my fellow congregants. I sit here with no other agenda than to be present to the moment, to explore and reflect on the spiritual qualities that I strive for, to remind myself of the challenges of this broken world, and commit myself to engage in acts of tikkun, of repair. Wouldn't you want to be part of that experience?
Amen. That's a beautiful vision
It's in the
statement. You wrote that, right? That's
Yeah,
your.
it's in the book. It's in the book.
Yeah. Thank you for closing us out with that. I am gonna do a counting of the Omer for anyone who wants to stay for an extra minute or two for that for tonight, and then we will regather Wednesday evening next week at 7:30 for the session 3. Really appreciate everything. Rich conversation this evening. And again, no pressure to stay. And Robin Holtzman, if you have an interpretation for tonight's combination of Sfirot, that's always a nice thing. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Sfirat ha'omer hayom arba'a ve'esrim yom shehem shlosha shavuot ve'shlosha yamim la'omer. Today is the 24th day of the Omer, which is 3 weeks and 3 days, and the Sphiratic combination, sorry about the light here, is, see if I get it right this time, Tiferet Sheba Netzach. I think that's right. It's the third day of the 4th week. And Robin, what do you have for us?
So again, I have from Rabbi Yael Levy, and she writes, so her interpretation of Tiferet Sheba Netzach is beauty that endures. The earth and all that is filled with divine presence. Beauty abounds. At times we can feel ourselves filled and surrounded by splendor. Other times all we can see is brokenness and pain. It is our responsibility to search out, notice, and create beauty. It is our responsibility to allow the beauty to inspire our empathy and encourage our acts of connection and love. So that's her.
Amen. Thank you very much, Robin, for sharing that, and wishing everyone a good rest of the evening. Thank you to Alan Fetterman for Zoom hosting and all things facilitation for this class, and we'll see you all hopefully next Wednesday evening. Thank you. Have a good night. Bye.